And welcome to the Practice as Research seminar series. It's the 1st of February in the UK. We have, unfortunately, a strike day today, but I'm still excited to have a presenter and attendees. And today's session is going to be about hooks and pain. And to be honest, I'm really excited about this one. I met Federica well, a couple of years ago now, I suppose, and we were talking about suspensions and body suspensions, and I, to be honest, wasn't really quite acquainted with what that is. But when Federica showed me, I was quite fascinated by how you can do that to yourself, and how you then do research ethically. So I'm really excited that I was able to convince Federica to do a presentation for us on the topic of ethical concerns in practice-based research, especially on body suspensions. So just to give you a quick sort of rundown, Federica actually started her approach to anthropology in Switzerland. She is originally, well, she actually did her master's degree at the University of Turin, so in Italy. But she's got links to all sorts of other countries. So she obviously does have links to Italy and to Denmark as well. And she's at the university in Portugal. So a true European person in every sense of the word that we can say. And like I said, I'm really excited to have her here and to talk to us today about hooks and pain, ethical concerns in practice-based research on body suspensions. Federica, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm going to share my screen to let you have an idea about what we are going to talk about. So today I would like to share with you a presentation based on my doctoral research on body suspensions that was realized in between 2016-2019, the fieldwork. And I defended it in October 2022. So it's done. I had the pleasure to defend it at the Institute of Social Sciences, the University of Lisbon, as you mentioned. And I am very grateful because I had the great support of two incredible mentors, Chiara Pussetti and Cristiana Bastos. They were there for me and they helped me in going in this not such easy topic to explore from an anthropological point of view, of course. So during this presentation, I'm going to let you know a little bit about what a body suspension is, of course, how the research project was developed, and why I decided to use a practice-based methodology. It has been the solution to overcome difficulties related to the fieldwork, both experienced by my interviewees or research partners, and both by me, by the ethnographer. And then we're going to reflect a little bit on the ethical choices and the positioning that I assume, because I decided to adopt a militant role in the spread of the practice, which is a practice that is delegitimized as a deviant behavior by non-suspendee, including some scholars, and because of the pain that is involved. So let's start from the beginning. The PhD project was titled Learning to Fly, a trans-spatial ethnography on body suspensions in Europe. And the project focused on the exploration of meanings associated to suspensions. This topic is underexplored in social sciences. Very few data are available beside traditional contests in North America and Asia. So, and while the few European studies often assume that pain is the main goal, and they address the suspendees as affected by pathological conditions. Pictures of these presentations are authored by me, otherwise explicitly indicated, because I feel important to include them, because I consider research experience as a teamwork, so not a monograph, but the results of several supportive communication multiply provided and co-created. So all people involved gave me the informed consent also for appearing in these pictures and in authorizing the reproduction of their social contents. So let's start what a body suspension is? Well, a body suspension is the elevation of a human being, so a protagonist, through hooks, metal hooks, temporarily inserted in the skin. And the hook is linked to a rope, a system of rope actually, to an above scaffolding as the one that we can see here. And the main rope, once that you pull it, there is the elevation of the person. The number of hooks depend on the pose that the suspendee choose. For example, here we have a schema illustrated by Shannon Laratte and Alan Falkner, where the most common suspension pose with their names are illustrated. The time of the suspension really depends by the will of the suspendee, the experience level, the suspension figure, of course, and other elements. There are three main phases to realize a suspension. The first one is the piercing, so the hook insertion. Then there is the rigging, meaning the connection of the hooks with the scaffolding. That is called rigging as well. And then there is the aftercare, so the person comes down and the hooks are removed. Who facilitate a suspension? Well, facilitators. They usually work in team or suspension crew made by a little number of people who are experienced in the three phases that I mentioned, but sometimes I observe also facilitators working by themselves, so individual facilitator. Here we have some example of hooks. There are several models, depends, of course, by the suspension pose, or so the preferences of the piercer, and the fact that the suspension can be dynamic or static. So also different models of hooks are involved in this sense. And as well, there are different models of rig, like those here. So I would like just let you have an idea where people practice, so where the ethnographic field took place. So the research based mainly on festivals and private events. Festivals such as in Norway and Italy, and daily events in Portugal, but after a while also the online part of the ethnography impose itself in the fieldwork. So I had to I wanted to include 2 Facebook groups and an online ethnography for around 1 year that was overlapped during the in-person phase of the fieldwork. On Facebook, people share pictures and statements about suspensions that co-work in the signification of the practice as a bonding experience and an enhancing self-exercise. The decision to go online was motivated by the fact that suspendee maintain contacts among them with social media. So not only after meeting, but also during them. For example, posting pictures and statements during a spectacular suspension with very creative riggings, meaning the interlacement of ropes that we can see, for example, in this picture here. So in this sense, the suspension community is unbounded by physical gatherings. And because of this, I propose an approach that I call trans-spatial, meaning the interlacement of online and offline spaces. And basically, I was looking for the influence of offline behavior in online ones and vice versa. So, the fieldwork sections mainly focus on this 3 types of contests. And just to let you have more details about big festivals, we're talking about meetings of 100 attendees, more or less, with an international presence. They stay together for 3, 4, 5 days, and several crew from around Europe, but sometimes also from North America and Canada. They come to stay together, to suspend together, and over than 100 suspensions are realized in the same festival usually, because some people ask for a second one once that everybody had the first. And in festival, there are often lectures about how to facilitate difficult position, for example, so addressed to facilitators, but also roundtable about how to emotionally connect with suspendees, book presentations and other lectures by invited guests, such as well-known artists or professionals like anthropologists and psychiatric. It's not uncommon also to have yoga classes, shibari demonstration, and other related activity related to the body. And these aspects underline that the body suspension is inserted in a net of acts of care to the body. Suspendees share a body approach in a lifelong projectuality, addressing suspension not as isolated episode, but as actions aiming to enhance the person through the body. And they are developed with other activities of body enhancements, such as meditation, sports, vegan diets, abstinence from alcohol, or other elements, for example. And about this, it's important to note that suspensions are usually inserted in lifelong experience of body interventions. Tattoos, piercing, ear stretching, split tongue, implants, scarification, even nullification, so the removal of the navel or other parts of the body. And such body marks reflect an autobiographic self-narrative. Each mark is dedicated to a relationship and to a life episode perceived as a pillar of the personality, something that is elected as defining the person, and so the flesh is constantly updated to celebrate events in terms of rite of passage, forging the person. And of course, the person herself is the one choosing such elements, so self-designing who she is. Each intervention confirms the correspondence of the body with the self, which is a reflexive self-making project, as post-essentialist and postmodern scholars has indicated, such as Giddens and Bauman or Schiller. The self is an individual responsibility that has to be original, unique, authentic, and always a better version compared to yesterday. And in this sense, suspensions and other body modification reveal their very mainstream value. I personally had a lot of trouble with this because I do not have body modifications in this sense. I do not have tattoos. I just had a couple of piercings that I left through the course of the years. And I also decided to not suspend myself. And this was not an easy decision as anthropologist, right? I'm going to come back on this, but for the moment, I would just say that the access to the field was somehow difficult. I had to learn how to stay in the fieldwork, how to be in the suspension community, how to observe a suspension without a passive positioning. And some suspendees helped me a lot, little by little, suspension after suspension, about how to emotionally assist and support the person that is on the hook. In fact, I address the community as emotionally and emotional based, with a reference to Maffesoli and Barbara Rosenwein, meaning that the community is a symbolic space where interactions are shaped around affections, respect, and there is a shared code of conduct based on intimate touches and kind whispered words. So let's talk about the problem. The challenges during the fieldwork were several. First of all, the distance from research partners concerning my body approach, the absence of body modifications, and because I decided to not suspend. Then, putting suspension, narrate suspension orally was frustrating for informers. Suspendees kept telling me that it was harder to talk about suspension, and if I wanted to know and to understand, I had to suspend myself, of course. But I always felt that this was a kind of a shortcut, right? A way to avoid to put suspensions into words. As I said, my body project was very different from my suspendee partners of research. And I tried just once a suspension would never correspond to suspensions realized by regular practitioners, as my interlocutors were. Furthermore, I think that a good ethnographer does not need to replicate exactly the phenomenon she is observing. Otherwise, only Black people could work on Black studies, or only women could work on women's studies. But also in this case, we would make a terrible mistake, I think, because not all Black people or all women have the same insight or experience, right? So what makes sense for me is to be aware that each positioning entails pro and con, and we have to try to maximize them. I was not only defined by the decision to not suspend, but also by my gender, my educational path, my incoming level, the tone of my voice, my body size, and so on. So what I did, for example, I decided to openly share my untattooed arms and legs. The most part of festivals take place during the summertime. So t-shirts and shorts are very common. So showing my untattooed arms and legs, reminding people that I was a kind of outsider. And so I needed their help to understand. Sometimes interviewees try to make similarities between hooks and tattooing needles, for example. So it was useful in that moment say, you know what, I have no idea what you're talking about because I've never been tattooed. So let's try to unfold this similarity. Let me know, what do you mean, making the reference with the needles of the tattoo? So people started to involve comparison with other elements such as extreme sports or the pain of labor, for example, because I was pregnant during the fieldwork. And these interviews helped in opening the topic of the pain in a different perspective. And then the final problem was the pain. At the beginning of my research about suspension that started in 2007 for my MA in Torino, I made some interviews, and after a while, I realized that all of them were talking about pain. But paradoxically, everyone was asserting that the pain was not so important. Only after a few years, I understood that I was overestimating the role of the pain, posing the wrong questions, because, as one of my interlocutors said, you know, there is so much more than pain in a suspension. In that moment, yeah, I understood that I needed a practice-based method. But before to get it, there is another problem related to pain that we have to remember. It is linked to the delegitimation of the practice by outsider of the community, including some scholars. The research of pain, suspension, is often interpreted as a deviant behavior. And the philosopher Byung-Chul Han would say that the pain is a modern taboo, and that's why suspendees are often delegitimized as mentally sufferers. The perception of pain shapes how suspendees practice and how they narrate suspensions, including strategies of invisibility online and offline. And at the beginning of the fieldwork, often I had difficulties related to the fact that I was investigating on a practice that I was not performing, so without other body modification. So many people were worried that I could misinterpret the practice because I was not an insider of the community. So that's the solution, I mean, the practice-based method. First of all, to reduce the distance between me and suspendees, I decided to involve a creative laboratory that I'm going to illustrate in the next slide. It became a tool of extra communication and also of empathic connection. And the creative laboratory was attended by 17 interviewees over a sample of over 60 research partners. And the laboratory was inspired by the work of Chiara Pussetti, who works on art-based ethnography, showing that uses of artistic practices can improve the ethnographic experience, discovering new topics of research, catching, I'm quoting Chiara, the non-verbal dimension of the experience and exploring the unspoken and the unspeakable, favoring a reflexive approach and communicating in a more effective way the multisensorial lived experience of the field. making space for a multiplicity of voices to be heard. And following my mentor, Chiara, creativity is here understood as a process of meaning production composed by aesthetic choices and resulting in handcrafts. And it corresponds to ethnographical data and scientific basis for new anthropological knowledge. So let's see what this laboratory is about. So here I try to show the main steps constituting the creative laboratory. Basically, I invited the suspendee to create objects as metaphor of one or more aspects deserving attention related to one of their upcoming suspension. Using objects, sounds, images, colors, smell, and taste, we try to complete what words were not able to express. And it was a co-creative and participative experience, a way to interact and co-produce data. My goal was to find a common way to communicate, expressible beyond words and accessible to comprehension. Objects were created together, step by step, interview after interview, sometimes face-to-face and sometimes not, in a co-participative projects where both the ethnographer and informers were aware of their reciprocal influence, as well as during oral interviews. And those suspension narratives are not only verbocentric narratives. I observed the communication of ideas about what a body suspension means, its emotion, risks, motivations, expected outcomes, and moreover, its extra value when it's shared inside the community. So in this structured path, I collected data around objects and they became referent of the oral communication, actually interlacing words and objects together. So we started from a first contact, generally online, where I invited and I explained the idea of the workshop. Then we find together a hot topic to focus on. And then we try to associate a symbol, a metaphor, able to express such topic. And then I asked them, okay, how would you like to create this symbol? Do you want to paint? Do you want to take a picture? Do you want to cook? Whatever. It's the point is not the path. The point is not the result, the final result, but the path that we are going to share in order to get it. And finally, when we met in person just before their upcoming suspension, we had in-person interviews. And then once that the body suspension took place, I asked people to come back to the object for a final moment together. And I asked them, would you like to change something? And this was also useful in order to collect data related to expectations or unexpected topic, you know. One of the example of this laboratory was brought by Silvia. Silvia opened actually our interaction to an unexpected topic. It was the importance of the other in a body suspension. And here we have Silvia with the statue that she produced. Silvia is the friend of another interviewee, Fabio, and she planned to go with Fabio in a suspension festival, but not to perform. So just as a chaperone of Fabio. And even if she already had a suspension experience in the past, she decided to not perform that time because the event was expected to be very popular with a lot of people. I told you over 100 people generally attend a suspension festival. So she was worried to be surrounded by so many strangers, people never met before. And so I asked her to work on this feeling. And once we met at the festival, after that she saw Fabio suspensions, she decided to suspend as well. So she changed her plans and she decided to represent this new situation on the handcraft. And these are the pictures of the statue resulting from the process. The sculpture is composed of a wood base, which has spikes nailed in a circular pattern. They represent the people surrounding a suspension. So Silvia in suspension is this little object. And all around, there are the nails representing the people attending a suspension, actually, all around, right? Nails are linked by a transparent nylon string that symbolize the energy between the participants and the net holding the little statue. And this statue, as I said, represents Silvia herself and is comprised of an iron strike with 3 transparent balls that are Silvia's head, heart, and stomach, and which is supported by the community. The red color of the wood base is also visible at the bottom of the spikes. Can you see here? And when I was looking this picture, when she was working on that, and I was there around making noise and giving her not the peace and the quiet to work on that, I asked Silvia if the red color was a reference to the pain. And she was absolutely denying it. She said, no, you know, it's just because I like, but now that you make me think, you know, I would like to stress another meaning here, because the color is both on the base of the nail and on the base of the main base. And in my perception, you know, suspensions make me feel connected with. So I would like to stress this extra symbology with the color of with the red color in these both elements. Well, this is a lot because in this example, we gave space to other meanings beyond the pain. And the handcraft became the referent of Silvia interviews, basically Silvia's words. In another example here, I had the chance to collect data about the importance of the nature. This person, Elena, created this little statue that was exposed during a congress on exploratory methods in ethnography, the colleagues workshop in Lisbon in 2017. And Elena decided to create an umbilical cord from the navel of the Barbie up to this plant that was on the base. And it's not a case that the Barbie is hanging from a tree. This is a very typical anchor point for suspension in Portugal. And plus this link, this connection between the suspendee and the earth, or a plant with flowers, stress the importance of the nature and the ability, the power that suspension has, according to suspendees, to enhance the person, specifically for what concerns the connection with the nature, the natural environment. But the previous example, the statue of Silvia, show us the importance of the social environment. Finally, this example helped me in showing the regenerative effects of suspensions. This is the project of Martina. She's performing in the same suspension pose that she painted on the triptych. How the regeneration is possible, because there is an altered state of consciousness during suspensions. This is activated by the pain, according to amic explanations. On hooks, suspendee alter their ordinary perceptual abilities, and from the disarticulation of the self, the coded chaos of sensories, they end up feeling different, enhanced version of themselves, with a different perception of who they are, the importance of the other in their life, not only those attending a suspension event, and the importance of the natural environment. Just to, if I have enough time, do I? Yes, I think. I wanted to just show you, following this step, the project of Martina, for example, started from the concept of lightness. So something without a lot of waste, right? The lightness, according to her, was an important element of her upcoming suspension. And I asked her, so how can we find a symbol for that? She proposed a butterfly. But after a while we were still talking and creating connections, you know, sometimes with pauses of days or weeks, because we used a lot of internet-based methods such as WhatsApp and messengers, she decided to change. So instead of a butterfly, she chose a moth, a night butterfly, that was, according to her, more close to the unmainstream idea of femininity that she was actually performing in the everyday life. So this helped also to show that suspension has something to do with the gender identity and how people navigate into the world beside the suspension itself. So the work of the creative laboratory indicated that beside pain, there are meanings deserving attention. And this intuition supported a new way to look at data, to listen suspension narratives and stay on the fieldwork. And I also started to look in a new way the literature and the scientific literature, understanding that suspension were analyzed implying a pathological construction of the voluntary pain. And unnecessary, and so index of deviancy. And this is why there are a strategy of invisibility, especially online, but not only. And this understanding motivated me to put the research at the service of the suspension community in a militant approach. So hence handcrafts became a strategy of dissemination. After being a methodological choice and a support of restitution with Informa, they were exposed during suspension events, but also during anthropological congresses, stimulating comments that helped me in coming back to the field with a new gaze, new questions, in a spiral movement that made me go deeper and deeper on meanings. And finally, some handcraft results have been exposed at the art exhibition of the project Excel, the Pursuit of Excellence. The art exhibition was named Be Fucking Perfect. And it took place in September 2022, October 2022 at the Auric Gallery in Lisbon, curated by Chiara Pussetti and co-organized by me and Isabel Pires, with the support of Terra Splendida, Antonio Faria, as scientific activity of the ICS and founded by the Fundação para a Ciência e Tecnologia. And from an ethical perspective, I dedicated a lot of energy in analyzing the positioning that I was taking, circulating the handcrafts of the laboratory. Suspendees' voices deserve to be listened, and I hope my work will contribute in correcting the misinterpretations of suspensions and letting suspendees talk for themselves, basically. Suspensions are, I said, discriminated, and I take a distance from a pathologization of suspension, because I think that relating the mental illness hypothesis to a practice is a powerful act of social delegitimation, which exclude unvalutative positioning. And in several occasions, I use real name of my research partner, as well as images, and I offered them the possibility to be anonymous, and I respected their decision when they refused the option. Otherwise, I would feel that I was assuming a paternalistic position, implying to know what is better for them. And I circulated informed consent, describing research objectives and informing about the possibility of quoting excerpts of interviews, as well as the reproduction of pictures and shoots during events and Facebook posts. And in the former, people could cross their preference for the anonymity related to interviews, pictures, or online posts. And since most of the people contacted already experienced the form of social stigma, many decisions about not being anonymous were equivalent to a militant position against discrimination. I have nothing to hide was a recurrent assessment, underlined that the visibility of suspendee could be a way to contrast the bias associated with suspensions by non-practitioner. And I interpret the request to use unfictionalized identities as statement of pride and courage, accepting the expectation that my work, the ethnography, could promote a restored imaging of the practice. So, if you have questions, I would be very happy to try to reply. And I would like to say thank you very much one more time.
Thank you very, very much, Federica. This is really, really exciting. I mean, I've obviously, like I said, you know, we've met a couple of years ago and we talked about embodied inquiry and creative methods and the use of objects. Those were the things that we were connecting about. But, you know, I've never really sort of heard you speak about the full-blown project as it's now completed. So it's really, really nice to hear you know, what you've got to say about that. And obviously body suspension is not necessarily something that is perhaps on the main radar of people. So again, it's something that's kind of quite different in terms of body modifications. So it's probably less known about as well. So in that regard, it's really, really exciting. As I said, it's really exciting to have you here today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Now, I am going to say anybody who has got any questions, please do either just unmute yourself or raise your virtual real hand, or feel free also to put a question into the chat box and I can raise it for you. Oh, I've got, okay, well, Sarah, handing over to you then.
I just wanted to say it was absolutely fascinating. I mean, as Nicole said, it's not something that is really examined by a lot of people or brought to the consciousness a lot. So I think it's a really fascinating project. And it's more of a comment than a question, but really I was interested in how much there is that sense of community of support and also the inherent trust that you've got to have in other people. Because I looked at those pictures of people, you know, inserting the needles, the fact they're all very gloved, it's all very conscious of that. So I wondered if you could say something about the sort of support and level of trust that it requires in others to put yourself in that position, or for the participants to put themselves in that position.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. Actually, another product of the creative laboratory was produced by a facilitator, and he produced a rope with a knot. Very simple. But this knot had also the meaning of the trust inside the suspension crew, so the little group of facilitators working together, which is conceived as a family in the family, right? But at the same time, it was also symbolizing the sense of responsibility that these people are very aware to have. And this is true on several levels. One is the mechanic responsibility for taking a person up in a safe situation, you know, because among the risk, there is also the possibility that the skin is lacerated by hooks that are not very well positioned, maybe the wrong type of hook according to the body spot where they are placed, or maybe because it's a dynamic suspension and not a static one. But also maybe there can be problem for how the hooks are connected to the above scaffolding, right? And then, of course, the main person, I mean, the person holding the main rope has another security position. Then there are suspension by the knees, for example, that if the suspendee fall down, the head can be injured. So you can see there are several situations that are extremely took with seriousness and professionality by facilitators. But at the same time, there is also another part of security that is more concerned about the trust and the empathic connection that people have in between facilitator and suspendees, but also in between the other members of the community that, for example, are there to hold your hands. One of the most significant interviews excerpt that still is in my mind is a suspendee saying that when you have your hooks on the skin, is like if you have a naked soul. So your soul is naked. Everybody touching you is like a person that is directly touch your really true self or your soul, which means that there is also a component of vulnerability. People open, and so they are vulnerable, and the others are aware of that. So the community also provide to take care of the suspendee in that sense, protecting the person and supporting emotionally, holding the hand, asking for, do you need something? Do you need a glass of water? Do you need some sugar? Because the sugar level is one of the thing that is continuously monitored to be sure that people are good in what they are doing, right? And not overcome by emotions and by the adrenaline of the moment. There is a lot of hormonal explanation for what is happening and also for the altered state of consciousness. But these are emic explanations. They still have to be tested, let's say, from a scientific point of view. And yeah, so did I reply to your question?
Yeah, thank you. Really, really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. So in response to that, actually, there is one question in the chat box that I'd like to bring up here, and that's about your position, because clearly you weren't doing a suspension, you weren't necessarily part of that community. So did there come up potentially the idea that you are some kind of voyeur who's kind of, taking advantage of that situation? So is that, the question is, did the issue of voyeurism come up for you as a researcher who's not involved in that community?
Okay, let's say that taking advantage of my position is for sure something that is on the table, because I developed my PhD research thanks to the engagement of research participants and suspendees in this project. So the profit, the personal one, is there. But at the same time, I try to share the benefits of the ethnographical cooperation. And that's why I decided to not keep the handcrafts of the laboratory, but to put them at the service of the community that actually asked me to help them in circulating the good meanings, the real meanings, actually, that nobody ever thought that could be there beside deviancy and pathologization and pain, just because pain is good. No, that's not the point. There is so much more beyond pain. That's the point. And I also think that saying that I am not in the suspension community, it's not completely true. I actually define myself as a mascot in the suspension community, because I'm a black sheep. I have a naked skin compared to my research partners. My tongue is not split in two. I am not tattooed. Actually, I started to pink my hair in pink thanks to the experience of the fieldwork, let's say. But yeah, beside that is true. I'm not a full insider, but I'm not neither an outsider, because the respect, the fact to be there, the fact to understand how to support a suspension is not something equivalent to observe as a passive positioning, right? I learn how to hold the hands of people that are pierced. I was actually invited to hug people during the suspension, because I had the privilege to develop also personal relationships with some suspendees. So I think that, yeah, benefits are for sure something there, but I also think that being in the suspension community at suspension events for over than a decade made me feel that, yeah, I'm not... I'm in between an insider and outsider. I'm a mascot.
To be honest, that we probably, most of us are that when we enter research field, that we're not quite insiders, but we're not quite complete outsiders either. So we're probably somewhere in between. I know that you're strapped for time. I've got one more, but there are two more questions. So one is really quick. If you could answer that very quickly. The question was, oh, I've lost it now. Your participants mentioned in the discussion were predominantly female. Was there a gender bias? That was the quick question. Is there a gender bias in body suspensions?
Okay, there are gender-based discriminations, as I would say, like in any other kind of community, yeah, more or less. And this is something that's actually gave me also the legitimation, I mean, the coherency to not use a subcultural perspective, because I do not think that the belonging in a group exclude multiple belongings in other contexts. And when we think that someone belongs to a group, we kind of, in a predeterministic way, assume that other behaviors are there. No. Actually, the number of suspendee equally is equally divided in between female and male, but there are also a lot of members that self-identify as gender fluid. And I think this is because the community is very friendly and open and very attentive to not discriminate on any sort of diversity. This is one of the reasons why I was not discriminating being there, I think. Yes, sometimes there are gender-based discrimination, but this is more concerning the cultural way to produce facilitator, but this is a big topic that I think will take us too far. But yeah, no, I probably mentioned more female interviewee because I had more personal contacts with them, maybe on the base that I self-identify as a female, but in my sample, I was very attentive to not have the same bias, because sometimes it can happen. But no, genders are equally represented at suspension festivals. Let's say like that.
Thank you very much. There's a couple of comments saying how interesting the project is and how fascinating the research was. There's one more question about how does this contemporary practice of suspension compare to traditional forms, shamanic practices, for example, Indigenous American sundance or monastic flagellation, you know, those kinds of practices. Is there a direct link somehow?
Okay, that's not a quick question, but I'm going to try to do my best. I'm not stressed for the timing. I mean, that's okay, Nicola.
Good.
So first thing to say, let's make things easy. In one hand, traditional right. In the other hand, what I studied. Let's say that. But even this is a very big simplification that define a very different kind of phenomenon, right? Because a traditional rite of passage is not just one thing. It can assume different forms, right? Is not anchored in the past. It is not just in one form. But anyway, for sure, when you learn something from the generation of your parents, for example, okay, you base it with the tradition. It creates a sense of connection between you and your ancestors, for example. And everybody in your living group belong to that community that share the same interpretation of what you are doing, right? This is the big difference with what I studied, which is something that people of the same, of the blood family, let's say, do not understand. So not the parents, but sometimes there are people that suspended avec their parents, you know, so there are exceptions. And of course, the lack of meaning is one of the main problems with the non-suspendee, even your neighbors that live very close by you, but they have no idea what you're doing and why you're doing that. So this is the big difference. And of course, there are other kind of links in the book that I am creating it as a result of the doctoral dissertation. A chapter is dedicated to the history of modern European suspension, how they spread here in Europe. One of the main characters who played a role in this passage from USA to Europe. And why I say USA? Because in USA there was the first body suspension festivals at the end of the last century. One of the main characters was Fakir Muzaffar. He was the father of modern body modification and suspension, very active in the 90s in San Francisco area, but not only. And he directly was inspired by Native American for what he was doing as body suspension. But because of this, many modern suspendee took distance from him, because they didn't share the same interpretation of American Indians. So that's American natives, I'm sorry. So that's why there are links for sure, but not as easy as we would imagine. That would be better for, doing the research, but no, they were more complicated.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Federica. Thank you so much for having been here today. This was really, really exciting. And yeah, I mean, there are some, comments in the chat box about how interesting your work is. I'm just going to very quickly share the practice as research details, and please do feel free to subscribe to the recordings on the PAR YouTube channel, on the Buzzsprouts channel. Check out the practice as research website. Because of how the strike days are coming up over the next few weeks in the UK, I'll be honest, I'm a little bit at a loss as to what exactly is going to happen with the seminar series. So I can just ask for everyone to keep an eye out on the Eventbrite and the mailing list and the PAR network, and we can communicate through there. Thank you very, very much again, Federica. I really appreciate that you've been here, and I look forward to hearing more of you and from you in the future.
Grazie, Nicole. Thank you very much, everybody.